There's nothing quite like the excitement of waiting for a sequel to a game or series that you loved, glued to your screen at every showcase, waiting for an announcement, hanging around on forums predicting new story developments and features that could come, and then staying up for the midnight launch or booking the next week off of work to binge from start to finish. But then, the worst happens. The game's not giving you the same excitement you originally got. They've made unnecessary changes to the story, they've added in useless features, or worse, they've completely overhauled the entire game. Surely it's not that bad, you ask yourself, as you make your way to the ending credits, only to be left feeling disappointed, empty, maybe even betrayed. A bit dramatic, I know, but spend 5 minutes on Reddit and then tell me I'm wrong. But with that out of the way, here are 5 video game sequels that I personally don't think lived up to the original. Outlast 2. If you saw my video before this one, you'd know I was a big fan of the first Outlast, which is why it sucks having to put this one here. But this one is a good example of the disconnect between developers, publishers, and the fans of the finished product. What we as fans wanted was a tight, well-designed and well-written story similar to that of the first, that took us on a journey of terror and mystique. Sadly, what we got was a game that relied way too heavily on jump scares and shock value to the point that the story just seems silly by trying to justify it all. There's so many points in this game where it looks like it's finally going to get off the ground with weird plot points and character developments, only for it to stumble at the last hurdle. You have enemies that seem to have X-ray vision, tracking you to the darkest corners long after they should have lost sight. Lighting that seems more like a tool to trick you rather than guide you, and the deaths rarely if ever felt fair. I don't think horror games are supposed to be easy, but when you have to get killed at least once in every section just to figure out where you're going, all the pacing and fear is dead. If you ask me, Outlast 1 should have been left as a standalone game with its DLC. I get they wanted to keep up the momentum from its popularity, but they should have made sure they had more to go off of, instead of just relying on nudity and blood as an aesthetic for horror. Dark Souls 2. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Dark Souls 2, because there's a ton of channels that could explain why it didn't live up to the potential of Dark Souls 1 way more eloquently than I could. But from weird mechanics and level design to even weirder enemy placement, Dark Souls 2 made a lot of strange decisions that seem purposefully made to hinder itself from achieving the heights of its predecessor. Although I will say I did enjoy some aspects. Majula was beautiful, and the accompanying music was superb. Dranglake Castle looked stunning, the Mirror Knight was a fun twist, and the Dragon Eyrie was an absolute spectacle the first time you go there. But regardless of all the things it may have done right or wrong, I honestly don't think there's much they could have done to save Dark Souls 2 from living in the shadow of the first. It was such a lightning in a bottle moment for gaming. It's just a shame they made such strange decisions that made it even worse. But with all that being said, I love FromSoft, and I'd still consider Dark Souls 2 a good game, just worse than the others. Jak 2 Renegade. I mean, the subtitle alone is enough to show you how far removed this game is from the original, but full disclosure, I loved this game as a kid. I was a fan of WWE, Linkin Park, and skateboarding, basically every ingredient that makes an edgy teen, so this was probably quite literally made for me. But coming back to replay it as an adult, there's a lot of problems here. First of all is how the original's fun and bright comedic platforming sensibilities got binned for some dark, edgy shooter. Levels are needlessly reused over and over again, and the characters are, for lack of a better word, cringy as hell. Don't get me wrong, there are much worse games you could have been playing when this came out, but going back to it now just feels awkward. The driving mechanics are an absolute nightmare, but take up so much of the game it's actually infuriating. Some levels are ridiculously hard to the point it just seems unfair, and the level design is such a downgrade. The thing that frustrates me though is that it could have been so much better with a bit more thought put into it. Maybe adding some side quests, better dialogue, and maybe bridging the gap narratively between the original to ease us into it a bit. Then maybe this game would have held up a lot better today. But if at any point you feel like revisiting Jak and Daxter, then I couldn't recommend the original enough. It's still an amazing game that holds up today, but if you really need your fix of mid-noughties cringe, then go for Jak 3. At least they improved the driving there. Duke Nukem Forever. Look, I know this game has been done to death in these kind of videos, but I don't think I could forgive myself if I didn't talk about a game that lets you pick up poo and draw genitals on a whiteboard. Also, as much as I don't play them an awful lot now, I'll always have a soft spot for the old boomer shooters, playing the likes of Doom and Quake on the family PC. Duke started as a parodic take on 80s action heroes, but sadly somewhere within the 14 years of development hell this was in, he managed to gaslight himself into believing he genuinely was the most badass alpha male manly man in the world. The game was so twisted from the original idea. Rather than tongue-in-cheek jabs and references to pop culture, we got a game that seemed like it was genuinely just trying to make fun of the only audience actually still willing to play the game by the time it came out. Now, I was never a fan of Duke as a character anyway, but this game was an absolute shining example of why this just doesn't work anymore. You can't even get through the opening level without feeling your skin crawl. I'm all for recycling, but this game deserves to join ET in the landfills. The Evil Within 2. The second game looked to continue the story of the first, but sadly just couldn't quite reach that same level. Now I don't think it's a terrible game or anything, but when you compare it to the first, it did leave me feeling very underwhelmed. Originally directed by Shinji Mikami, the first was a tightly designed labyrinth of fear and suspense that kept you wondering what was lurking around each corner, with a story full of action and intrigue. A 9 out of 10 game in my opinion, and clearly had influences from Resident Evil and Silent Hill. But the second just felt a lot more rushed. The gameplay is similar to the first, focusing on combat, stealth and exploration, but where the game falls short, at least for me, is in its story and level design. The story just doesn't live up to the original. It feels very contrived and generic. The wonder and intrigue of the world you're in is lost since it was mostly explained by the end of the first one, and the whole dad saving his daughter thing is very overdone. Don't get me wrong, it can work, but when compared to what we got prior, it's quite stale. Then you have the sections of open world gameplay. I've got the attention span of a child snorting sugar. I will walk away, I will forget what I'm doing, and I will forget why I'm doing it. So all sense of pacing is absolutely dead once you let me wander off from the main objective, especially in a horror game. You're supposed to be on the move, desperately pushing forward, trying to survive and reach your goal. I did like the enemy designs though. Not quite as much as the first, but they've done a good job at creating monsters that look like they were designed by someone like Junji Ito or Hideshi Hino. So that's 5 sequels I don't think lived up to the original. What sequels do you think didn't live up to the first? Let me know in the comments, and like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.